How are you all doing? Welcome back. We are hearing a lot of conversation going on. That's great. It means that there's a lot to keep going and doing, and based on the concepts of the panels that we've listened, reflecting on the position of our country regarding investment, how to continue working and thinking about this subject. I would like to share with you that we were going to put focus on foreign investment and the perspective of these global challenges, but focusing on financing, global consultants, investments, and tendencies, risks, opportunity that are defining these issues for the coming years, especially in the geopolitical context. So we're going to welcome Sebastián once more, who is going to moderate this very necessary conversation. Sebastián, thank you very much for this introduction. The issue that we're going to talk about in this panel is very relevant. I believe that the conversation unavoidably is going to be connected with what we spoke about in the first panel. It's going to be very interesting to deepen in this matter from the perspective of financing the international tendencies for investment and foreign investment, and to project certain scenarios regarding the outlook our panelists have. When you speak about foreign investment and the tendencies, we'll have to highlight the perspectives that investment funds, consulting firms, banks have regarding this issue. There's a lever in this sense that makes projects viable or not, and it's critical when it comes to evaluate what Chile is offering as a space and foreign investment platform. It's not just financing the main initiatives and projects that are developed in the country, but also they have a very detailed outlook, and they're following this economic scenarios. I'd like to introduce our panelists of this second block. We're going to talk about this perspective for 2026 with Macarena Navarrete, the EY country manager. Thank you, Sebastián, for this We also have Jean-Marc Arbogast, country manager from the World Bank. Oltmann Ahlers, the Latin American director from MANOVA Partners. Welcome. Thank you for inviting me. And José Mestres, partner in Latin American investment for PATRIA Investment in Infrastructure. Thank you very much for this invitation. Good to be here. Thank you all for being here. I hope we have a very fluid conversation with different perspectives. Just like in the first panel, we have different visions on the different trajectory of how we're going to build a common view on these subjects. Let's start with a wider view. Macarena, I would like to start with you in this global scenario. A global scenario with more geopolitical fragmentation, uncertainty, a financial component as well, interest rates that were high for a while regarding these inflation cycles. How are you looking the foreign investment perspectives towards Latin America in the short and midterm? Not so extraordinarily, if you will. I'm sorry not to be so positive. Not so great, because this is a competition. Foreign direct foreign investment can go to different destinations, and undoubtedly we're hoping that these go to emerging markets. Nevertheless, Latin America and the Caribbean have some aspects that don't necessarily make them the most attractive markets in this period. Labor market, external demand that's still depressed. Many countries of the region still need to do fiscal adjustments, a lot of political and economical uncertainty. Let's think on these discussions on the geopolitical discussion between China, United States, and Russia, and where they want to make us the backyard of some great power. So we're starting to ask ourselves, is this going to be easier or harder? to have investments of countries within the continent and Chile. In that same sense, if it makes it difficult to have global exchange, export mechanisms may not be so positive. We have to also think that the effect of the tariffs in global commerce, we haven't seen them yet in their entire magnitude. These Latin American countries tend to have a lower productivity. We have institutional weakness, safety issues. Infrastructure and education issues are still present. So I would say that direct former investments going to be concentrated in emerging countries, but not Latin America as a first destination. Jean-Marc, what's your vision on these short and mid-term perspectives? Well, first off, thank you very much, Invest Chile, for inviting me and to have this opportunity to be here. It's true that foreign investment is going to be more selective than what we've seen in the past, given the volatility that we have. But we see very good resilience in this investment. So the region in Latin America, we still see it as with good opportunities. We see a lot of investment from our viewpoint. I'd like to start saying that based on foreign companies in the region will continue investing and increasing their capabilities, reinvest what they've made in the region. And that means that nowadays in the region there are returns adjusted by risk that are still attractive. That's why we see that. We also see the region as very attractive because it has a lot of natural strategic resources, especially on the energy transition. Obviously, copper, lithium, but we also see that in terms of digital infrastructure that's growing. Other energy sources like green hydrogen, all these sources are critical. We see a very good opportunity and lots of interest in that line. The third point, the geopolitical issues. We have partners that see the region very favorably for diversifying their supply chain, the value chain. We also see great opportunities for investment. And I think at the end what's going to be important, and we've heard this all through the morning, is the uncertainty. How to manage risks, how to address uncertainty. And that's where we're going to speak about multilateral banks that I believe have a very important role. We have products of insurance to lower this risk, and our role is to ensure that we work with investors to lower the risk so they can invest and create jobs and generate income for them. Thank you, Jean-Marc. Oltmann, going with you. So, what's coming for 2026? The question, this is a global competition. Capital goes to where they get the best price per risk. So thinking and competitive stakeholders, like for example Poland, somebody was saying Poland has a tremendous human capital where the dollars in Europe and defense don't stay in tanks, they go to Russia. So it's not what's happening within Latin America, but it's something global. And institutions in that context. So what institutions are looking for is institutionalities, to have good rules of the game, just like Gloria Hutt was saying. And there's also an issue of scale and scalability. So in that context, looking at the region, As you mentioned this, Mexico has certain competitive advantages that are not necessarily strong in the institutional side. Mexico has a big market, has infrastructure. United States and Mexico are so interconnected, and there's such a deep relationship. I don't want to say impossible, but it's very difficult to actually disarm. Mexico has a very good strategic. From an institutional perspective, we have a very considerable. We've operated in Argentina and Peru, we're going to Colombia, and we have an exemplary institutional base. We probably need to remember and value, because it's really exemplary, the capacity to make business. Very simple things like to start, have a checking account. I mean, that's relevant, and we have to be very clear in identifying those tremendous values that we have. And that we have to take it to global investment. Looking at what's happened in the last 4 years, that is very important. Jose, I would like to share a more optimistic view. I have very relevant challenges. If we look at the shocks of the last few years, we have the Trump shock, tariffs, institutional pressure on institutions. In practice, if we look at the foundations of economy, and that was in this morning's graph from William, it's been stable. It's true, Latin America hasn't grown, but it's pretty stable. We haven't seen much impact. And why? For many reasons. First, because economies have diversified over time. We don't depend as much on the United States. If we look at commercial exchanges with China, our main client in all countries, has been much more stable. The prices of commodities is maintained. In terms of Chile, copper is at a high price. That's favorable. So when we look at economy, we don't see a major impact. In terms of financing, if indeed rates are higher, but they're not as high as they could be. Spreads are very low. On Monday, I got a report that said that debt emission in January for Latin America was the second largest in history. Colombia emitted 5,050 billion, a little under 6% in the long term. And that's mostly what Colombia has done before, so we probably had the largest emission of debt. So this shows that the conditions could be variable, but they're not bad. We are in deflation processes, and this is moved by raw materials. What we see in PATRIA, we just developed some funds for the Fund 5 for infrastructure, for investing in productive areas, electrical, energy, logistics, transportation, water, digital data centers, long-term investments. We received $2.9 billion, and this is the largest we've done. So not that just what I'm looking at, it's also our investors, and we're looking at different opportunities. So sometimes we have to see the cup half full rather than the half empty, and we have midterm investments that are very good. Are there anything specific? Of course, in Chile we have water in the central area in Chile. To think about renewable energies on the previous panel, but also in terms of electrification, energy transition, batteries, digital data centers. There's a boom here with major investments in Brazil. It's not the first time. We did a previous phase for investing on the cloud. Now it's for AI, which calls for larger sizes. So we see a lot of opportunities in different subsectors that I've mentioned: energy, transportation, ports, roads, digital, and there are a lot of opportunities. Interesting. Jean-Marc, let's think about the attractiveness that the region can win or lose, in Chile in particular, related to other emerging economies. What are the factors that are important in this backdrop with the geopolitical changes? Well, I think, well, I like to be a bit more positive and optimistic, so that's going to be my viewpoint today. Not just because I work in the region, but that's how I personally believe. At a more volatile world, I believe in the region in Latin America, it's very well located. It's going to win in this more volatile world. Why do I say that? Because the first reason is that many countries here have a lot of experience with shocks, external shocks, macroeconomic shocks, and shocks of different kinds. With this experience, they've been able to strengthen. And also, I believe that there are some very good institutions in the regions and the countries, very strong macro situations that in general are strong in comparison to other regions, as we see. And also impact of tariffs. There are impacts, but they're not as strong as we've seen in other countries. There is natural resources that I spoke about earlier, the many strategic minerals that are needed in the world for these decarbonization, a lot of demand. So I believe that the region is in a very good position, but, and this is very important, things change very fast, and we've noticed this in history. And I think William's presentation this morning showed that, yes, that what he showed is what happened in a century, but I believe things can change faster than that. So it's very important that the countries in the region make the reforms that are needed so that investments take place. Because at the end, it's a competition. We're in a very competitive world. There's a limit of capital. Capital goes where returns adjusted by risk are most favorable. So we have to work on that with the public sector so that the state sends the most important messages to investors. I believe that creates the most favorable surroundings. And that's very important for the region to remain in the positive place where it is. Macarena, well, based on what I was listening to, there are some interesting things I would like to share in Latin America and the Caribbean are in the same time zone that United States, which is a very demanding country. And this has been with like nearshoring, and this has impacted Mexico. But now there is a new kind of nearshoring that's not so near, which is technology, and we produce in the same time zone that United States consumes technology. So for us, regarding outsourcing in terms of technology, that's been extremely important. I believe that's something that I did not mention, and I think it's important to bring forth. It also has to do something with American tariffs. Something else is that Latin America and the Caribbean have a lower impact, excluding Brazil. Of course, Brazil has their own particular situation, but they have specific tariffs of personal hate, if you will. But taking them out of it, that's name and last name with those hates. But regarding the rest, Latin America has a relative low impact in terms of tariffs in comparison with the rest of the world. we estimate that the effect of the tariffs regarding stocks, margin, that we are able to, we don't see those impacts yet, the full impact. But regarding Chile, there's something very curious here. But in terms of Chile, the objective elements are not so different. But optimism in companies is in the heavens, in the cloud. So we expect that Chile next year, I'm actually talking this year, 2026, we're not expecting Chile to grow that much as 2025. That's what the central bank says, that's what multilateral organisms say, or not that much more. Nevertheless, our surveys of perception, what executives say, their companies will grow, the first and the last line, more. They will invest in the growth of their companies, and they're expecting returns on that. And the country's growth is the addition of all the growth of all the actors. So it seems that individual optimism says something different than the central bank and multilateral institutions analysis, and also how optimism is something that's relevant in economics. I think that's still something that still has to be seen. Added to that, investment in Chile in 2025 was better than 2024. From January to October of 2025, we did all that was done in 2024. So we're above the average since 2003. And there are things that the government, the new incoming government, could do if the politics and allows them, is that could actually help. If we think in direct foreign investment, the major component is reinvestment of profits. And that's secondary to regulation for taxing legislation. So it seems that certain measures like economical benefit, co-investment of the state, and many others that could be done, they could actually increase investment in a very important role.
And our main investors are Canada and the US for now. And that does not seem like it's going to change as geopolitics continues being the way it is. But in mining, we have great opportunities in copper, lithium, sustainable energy. So while it doesn't seem like it's better than the region, there's big optimisms, and there are areas where we could do things. And of course, we see communications, advanced communication, renewable energy, and when it comes to technology, we can do a lot, and we are doing a lot in data center. And there's still a lot that we could do. And of course, a copper price that is going up, and that could help Chile and the region with, price of copper going up and up, and that business local push, which could mean there's more international enthusiasm if we were to do things right. Well, I will not take over more time, but there's a list of several things that the government should do, and it will really depend on how things happen. Thank you, Macarena. And now, Oltmann, when it comes to the question on whether there's more changes or whether it's more attractive for investors, well, living apart, sovereignty, which I think is something that does not belong in the panel. The main consumer of the world turning their attention to you should generally be positive, and it could help you organize things. If you dance at the rhythm and there's not too many rules, then you should have a benefit. But I'll go back to the case of Mexico. There's no two Mexicos, right? and the distance between New York and LA, and the distance Matamoros and the port in the south of Tijuana, that cannot be compared. The geographic situation in Mexico it's difficult to quantify their potential. It's like the potential that we have when it comes to copper. So it's difficult to quantify how wonderful it is. But then we go back to institutionality. And when we talk to an investor, they try to know exactly what are the factors that will have an incidence. And there are factors that are difficult to quantify because we don't know them. For example, corruption and crime in Mexico. And so in the case of Chile, and we all talk specifically about the real estate market, usually we have exemplary institutionality, but contributions are truly something that has broken our thesis. And I'm not going to talk about the political issues in the last few years, but contributions is a monstrous uncertainty, and it's a bleeding that has not been stopped, and it's still there. It's completely arbitrary and cannot be compared to methods. And when you have risks and mitigations, there's a risk for contributions, and in any type of report that usually does not sit well with people. And so, of course, we're not going to go over all types of assets in Chile, but I think that we need to know what are those deal breakers, which for investors are difficult to identify. But if you don't have a clear number for the investment committee, that is going to be complicated. So if someone is competing with you, and you kind of know they're going to win. And so there is a task of identifying what are the assumptions and what are the things that are not yet clear. So solving them from a public policy standpoint, yes. Thank you, Oltmann. Jose? Yes, when I look at the region versus other areas in the world, the political stability or the political risk is less. And so if we think, there's a case of Venezuela, but maybe if there's a transition, that could be reasonable, but that is the only focus for conflict. But if you look at European emerging, you have wars, Ukraine, you have a conflict in Palestine, in Israel, and so we have different risks, and of course the latent risk of China invading Taiwan. So when you think about investment in the short and the mid and long term, there's a region that's steady, with the nearshoring, of course, and being able to work in the time zone and the American time zone, which is something important as well. And the raw material, particularly in Chile, in the case of copper, lithium, these are important needs, but this is for the long term. We have electrification, and copper is really important for defense, and it will continue growing. And so there's also something quite relevant here. And a third element is maybe the history factor of less investment and more opportunity. And when you have that could be used to be able to invest with real opportunities to support industries that are intensive in capital, such as mining, which need a lot of infrastructure, such as water. And so I think that conditions are quite interesting, and also the rotation of portfolio assets. So investors, they have an overexposition in the U.S. and they see volatility, and we see how investors, we don't like that, risk, and that's very unpredictable. That's very unpredictable, and it makes the U.S. less attractive in comparison to the rest, or being exceptional with the U.S. That's it's less relevant, and that could create a portfolio rotation with an important impact. And also, what's good is the assets have had a good return investment, and we look at bonds and we see how in the region things have been quite attractive, and that generates a sense of optimism. Going back to the future, going back to the past does not mean that you will have a return in the future. So that's another positive thing that would favor us, and just small movements in such big portfolios in something that's relatively less, which is for us that could have a big impact. So there are fundamental aspects here, and I think that makes a thing quite interesting. And that political optimism, and usually investors, they like governments that are pro-market, pro-capitalism, right-wing, and that's what we're seeing. We saw that in Argentina, we are seeing it in Chile now, Bolivia, Peru. We'll see what will happen in Colombia. It seems like it could happen again, Brazil as well. And so a focus towards governments that have a focus in structural reforms and better pro-growth agendas, and more focus on that, I think that could help. And having that focus, I think that means this is quite historical for us, and we need to work in a multipolar world, and we have the US relatively happy, but at the same time we need to be able to continue selling products to China, which is our main commercial partner. And so we need to work properly, and if done right, that could be a source of midterm growth. Okay, now we'll have a round of questions, more specific questions for each of you, to look at different perspectives. And Jean-Marc, how would you qualify, public policies and increasing investment in our country, such as the bill for sectorial permit, and where are the next efforts, from the governments are now starting? Well, we have really considered that. Of course, changes in the bill for those permits, that's a very good progress, because that prevents uncertainty. There's it takes less time, and that's good for investors. So if I have to put an investment for the next 10 years, I don't want to wait 10 years until that investment starts making me money. And so it's important to do that, and it's important to look at the assessment of the environmental impact, and there's a lot of work to do to shorten those times. But just to respond to your question, where we need to direct efforts for the next government, I think, well, first, there's growth and creating quality employment and improving social services, social inclusion, financial inclusion, and all of that with a sustainability approach. So I think that those are the most important points. And how to do that? Well, there are three axes that are really important. First, we need to develop physical infrastructure, social infrastructure, and ports, of course, we need to have more ports, and I think that it's quite high, and it's important for competitiveness in the region. And in social infrastructure, there's the waiting lists, which are very long, so that's important, because if I have a small company, I have 10 employees, and for 2 days it takes too long. It's just a small type of tension, so that takes too long. So having the right system is important. Then there's a critical thing for the government, which is improving competence in different areas. There's still lack of competence in some areas, lots of concentration, and that means, innovation. That's my third point. But before that, regulation, more efficient regulation, looking at permits, and the third thing, which is really important, which is innovation. And that's where, my colleague was talking about it. There was an issue with adapting innovation, and so I think the government needs to in place a system and to support companies need to support innovation, because if there's competence, of course, many will survive, but many others will die. So we need to work with companies from outside. So it's important to accompany and to develop a system. And from our standpoint, we can work in the private sector, public sector, and in those three areas, in social infrastructure and physical infrastructure, regulation, and also mobilizing capital from outside. That's important, and we're there to support, to create quality employment and to improve the quality of life of Chileans. Thank you, Jean-Marc. Macarena, what are the sectors that you feel have more of a potential for attracting direct foreign investment in Latin America and in Chile? What would be the sectors that you think have a better perspective? Technological infrastructure, green hydrogen. Yes, I was talking about that because we have the receptors of the biggest investments, which is the US, Canada, but we still have lots of opportunities in copper, lithium, and sustainable mining, which is mining of the future, and financial services, where we are quite strong there. We still have more room to receive investment, and maybe something, an area where we could develop a bit more, which is we're not that powerful there. We're not as powerful there yet, in renewable energies, non-conventional renewable energies, advanced telecommunications, and the importance of technology. And that's where I was saying, the nearshoring, which is not as near in the US, could be quite interesting. And we want to continue building data centers, and that could be really important. And, what Oltmann said, there's a point where all of these aspects are subject to dropping those uncertainties in the assessment in Chile, and something that's uncertain, and following what Jean-Marc mentioned, is everything related to permits. There's been an improvement, but it could continue improving, and it improved when it comes to sectoral permits, but with environmental permits, there's a long way to go, and those are one of the measurements that would make all of these sectors where you could invest in Chile. That would make them much more attractive. And of course, an investment that comes from the government in innovation, it's going to be necessary if we want to get to the next stage. Yes, what's really important is, financial services, because that was not in the discussion, and we see that it's an area where there's still potential for growth. Yes, in that area, I think there's lots of room for growth. We see it's an active area, and it's an area that's being developed with high technology services, and it's an area that's including AI and cutting edge technology, so it's very pioneer. Yes, and there's a fintech bill which will generate a push. Yes, and the financial industry, we thought it could be more conservative, less of a pioneer, being the end, and it's not the case. There are stakeholders that are very traditional, involving in these areas. Yes. Thank you. Oltmann, in the last few years, Chile has also been part of the radars of real estate investors, foreign investors. So do you think this could be a trend that's increasing, and what could Chile do to strengthen this sector? Yes, it's on the radar. In Chile, we're investing since 2015 with capital from Asian and European institutions. And, well, why Chile? The genesis, and we see how deep the local market is, and the amount of savings in this country is something that's wonderful, because it's not only profit but or liquid capital, but we see that this is a point where those savings were touched on, especially with the funds that people were able to withdraw, and of course that's something that people were kind of afraid of, but that's strong for Chile. The amount of savings we have in comparison to our GDP. In this case, it's 2/3 only in pension funds, and so if we compare that to any benchmark, is huge. That's an area where we are really good at, and that affects community in debt for good, and so that's really valuable, and that is reinforced by the pension system. It's something we'll see in the long term, because basically international stakeholder, when they invest here, they say, well, if at some point I want to sell, do I need to wait for another international investor to be interested in this, or if there's or whether there's a local market that can absorb this? And that has a huge weight. And UF, we have changes. We have some changes, and any investment that is not in dollars. In Mexico, there's several dollars. Brazil, it's a question mark. But magically we have UF, which is a type of currency, and UF and dollar, that's quite flat. So that's great. You have a natural hedge, and you don't have to pay for someone to do that for you. That's quite expensive. So now, keeping all of that into account, which things that is most really positive, I would say that the flip side is the certainty in terms of permit, and that's something that we need to tune, and the amount of money that we have is hard to quantify beyond the hidden tax of time, delays. How can we bring capital to that reason? And second, and this is like the other extreme, the immediate and the long term, which is something I was really surprised with during the conversation. When it comes to presidential campaigns, the demography in Chile. Yes. I don't think we're actually understanding the demographic issue that we're in right now. Our birth rate in 2025 was 1.13. So that's less than Japan, less than Spain and Italy. And Europe has public policies to improve the demographic condition. They have been doing it for 15 years. So we are even worse than the average in Europe. And I don't see anything good happening in the future. So there's no incentives for family for having children. There's no incentives for procreation. So usually we need people, right? Particularly because our economical base is not sophisticated services. We need labor. And so the demographic issue I think is something that needs to be a long-term priority number one for public policies. It's an urgent matter, yes. And it was not present in the presidential discussion. It was not a priority. Yes, I'm sorry. To bring European capital to Chile or Latin America. For 10 years, we were always talking about, Latin America. We have kids. There's a, growing trend. And then all of a sudden, that was out of the picture. And not only that, but we are below Europe, in case of Chile. So I don't know how much I can say this, 1.13, that's so little. Thank you, Oltmann. Jose, from your standpoint, what's key so that Chile can strengthen this position in being a reliable destination, and especially in the long term for investment? Well, Well, that's a good way of setting the framework, because I think that we have discussed that. We have been investing for many years, and there's a risk of the constituents, and I think there's things that are not in the debate and others are in the debate. And I would say that there's nothing new, because it's all part of the debate, but there's thing that we have been discussing here. But there's two things: the taxes and permits. When it comes to taxes, I think that it's relevant in two aspects. First, stability. I think there's been a lot of noise, sometimes more noise about changes. And even Pilar mentioned this, investment vehicles, foreign investors, for us investors, that's really scary. So stability, visibility, seeing that there'll be no changes. And, the SL600 warranting the long-term import rate. And that was, considered for the country. So some stability would be important. And being objective, the corporate rate is quite high versus the city. So I think that considering product reduction would be a very good sign for investors.
Number two would be in terms of permits. That is something that's really present. We've mentioned it many times. There are different manuals, and there's a positive consensus that the outgoing government that made reforms as well as the incoming government that wants to do that. Yesterday the CPC presented a very long document. It's evident that it takes a long time for projects to get the permits. The same goes with tenders. It takes for a long time. We had a water project we started in 2015, and hopefully this year we'll finally get the permits. It's more than 10 years. That's too much. It's a long time. It's a long time to get the environmental licensing. Once you think you're done, then permits come, because permits, which is something I would like to mention, that many permits are sequential. Many are repetitive. Many of them have very indefinite timings that have to be shortened, and also perhaps create positive administrative silence, if after a certain time, goes by, and then you assume it's approved. So we have to make things easier, reduce complexity, and allow the funnel to move, and have these projects, that we lose internal momentum. There are changes in many places. So we have these three. Hopefully that the incoming government can do this and fast. So we're gonna address this. As Oltmann and Jose were saying, in terms of taxes, when you mentioned this, Macarena, the issue of taxing, what's the weight in the discussion? Gigantically important. We've been spending too much time talking about our taxing system, and that makes the eternal waiting of projects. We need faster to reduce the rate of taxes to companies, which is very high. We need different political groups to accept that is not fast to do without any realistic compensations. We have to understand who contributes to this compensation. We have to understand that it's not always the other doing this compensation. We all have to cooperate. We're going to broaden the tax-paying base. We're going to have to create a reasonable mechanism for another group. There has to be a minimum presumptive income, and so we don't have to affect those who are. And we also have to recover the political system, because part of the problem that we have and the way that we have issues with the with taxes because we have a political system that generates instability. We have to repair our political system to have more stability in legislation, where we're able to be convinced that this is reasonable and it's going to last forever. Taking into account what you were mentioning here, the fact that we abandoned foreign investment contracts, that is a mistake. We have to take that up again or something similar, because we haven't been at the same level of the circumstances in order to give legislative stability. So now we're going to develop our own merit for those who want to come and to invest, along with going with the idea we have to work in terms of infrastructure, not just ports, but also roads, energy routes. We saw what happened with the big blackout last year. Digital networks, more ample digital networks. We have to work around whatever facilitates operations and logistics and give clear impulses to productive sectors in which, as a country, we know we can shine. And saying to Oltmann, the danger, the demographic danger of what happens in the country is really high, and we don't realize that we're actually planting a bomb for future issues. We have to really have cultural changes and stimulus to families. We have to stimulate families, which is not easy. But why? Because since it's not easy, we have to start soon. We need to have real economic benefits to families, and work in cultural shifts that we revert this demographic issue and we reach a point where the lack of population generates a crisis. Jean-Marc, regarding taxing, how important is this nowadays? How much weight does it have in view of investors? Well, it's very important. And as I said before, the country has to be competitive vis-a-vis other countries. But when we talk about that, we speak about income. We also have to speak about expenditure. Expenditure has to be more efficient. That is very important for the country. There's a lot of discussion in those terms, how to make public expenditure is more efficient. We don't necessarily less, but more efficient, and invest in the important sectors. And there are many investment opportunities and many important things to be done, but I just wanted to mention something that Jose was saying regarding aging. The aging of the population, and we spoke about this as a challenge. But I also see this as an opportunity. And the opportunity is, well, the health system has to develop, generate more investment, more jobs. The same goes with the financial system. We have to support banks and the financial system that develop products that are adapted to this kind of population, because nowadays this population is a population that doesn't have the services and products that are adequate. So there are opportunities there. Of course, we have 10 minutes left for this panel. I like to take advantage of these last minutes to speak about the political aspects of Chile. Do you see this as an asset in front of investors, the fact that we have institutionality and the way politics have responded to this really convulsive system from 2019 to now? We've had a lot of elections, constitutional processes. We all know the history and how challenging and intense it's been, and it seems that that cycle has shut. But I would like to hear your vision regarding what Chile saw in that process back then. Is it an asset that we have this institutionality? What do you think, Jose? I do see it as an asset. As I was mentioning before, there was a time of uncertainty with the constitutional processes. I believe that the initial reaction to the social upheaval was going to the left or the right, the different rejections actually took us to a situation in which people concluded that perhaps we're not that bad as we thought we were. And I believe that there's been a maturing process. The institutions have been very important, and I believe that the campaign has been exemplary in that. So we're speaking about extremes, but it was very civilized at the end when the calls of the losing candidate and also the phone calls of Cast with the Boric, those are very important. People think they might be really look at Brazil when Bolsonaro did not accept his loss, Trump with the same first thing. This revenge system that we used to see in Argentina, we don't see that here, and that's important. I was telling that you before, we as investors, we like stability. Those of us who stayed here, live here, we've seen those who see it from New York, from London, from Beijing, from Hong Kong. To see that is important. Looking at a country where there is a political transition, where we speak about collaboration, that's not a minor. That's called for the institutionality that we look at. Oltmann. I have the same opinion. From 2019 onwards, we've seen something really exemplary. In fact, when we were talking to Europe about the situation after the political upheaval in 2019, we tended to reduce anxiety and saw it as a process for maturing of a country that is still developing, and time actually proved us right. On the political side and on the pandemic side, because we got those two tremendous simultaneous shocks, we have this wave effect. On the side with the political pendulum going from one side to the other, but also economically, financially, at a macro level, and also in people's and families' pockets, we're still in the process of stabilization. The waves of the pandemic are still moving. We still have we have many offices in Santiago that are empty. During the pandemic, nobody went back to the office. Everybody was working at home. Offices closed down, and for us that was an opportunity. We went out and bought offices for very specific conditions in Chile, and now we're seeing this to recovering. But the same as the political pendulum, there are still economic issues that we do see them as part of these waves, but in general we don't have to forget the superposition of these two events. When you get two punches on two different sides, unrelated matters, they have some implications. So we hope that the new government to be careful not on just on the political side, but also on the economic side. There was very deep pain of these superposed elements. Macarena. Totally in agreement. Institutionality is an asset. We have to understand that the social upheaval were something that will live globally, not just in Chile, but the way Chile overcame that is very Chilean, very institutional, and that characterizes us. Evidently, it's not something stupendous, to go from extreme to extreme in each election, but nevertheless, the country's development is not from extreme to extreme. We're still able to maintain a certain relatively stable path, relatively reasonable. There have been important corruption events in Chile, and I believe that nevertheless, just like Jean-Marc was saying, on how funds are being expended produces worry and certain investors, because they see that they are being charged a lot of taxes, so this corruption to happen. Regardless, I believe this is a good process, but we have to uncover. We have to uncover corruption. So I believe that the Chilean political process is good. It's working well. And Chile, in that sense, is a country is extremely attractive. When I speak with my colleagues in regional conversations, we have those who have presidents in jail, presidents who don't accept elections. And it's us that 2 hours after an election is ended, the new president, the former president are calling each other on the phone. They bother me. Why don't they answer cell phones? Do you don't have landlines? No, yeah, it's funny, but Chile is something separate from the rest. Thank you, Macarena. Jean-Marc, we will close with you. I'm going to say something very, very short. I completely agree with what my colleagues have said, but I believe that Chilean people here can be very proud of what they have. I have experience in other countries, and we've seen in other countries in other region not always working thus. And something that I was really surprised, I arrived here for a week, but in comparison of what I've seen in other countries, we've seen problems in other sectors. I mean, we've seen this in other countries, and it doesn't happen always. Jean-Marc, Macarena, Oltmann, José, thank you very much for joining us in this conversation, and also looking at the financial sectors. We'll ask you for an applause for everyone, and thank you for joining us today.